So surprisingly enough, the 2025 iPad lineup is not nearly as confusing as it has been in years past. You have four main iPad categories to choose from: the entry-level iPad 11th gen, you have the iPad mini 7, the new M3 iPad Airs, and finally the M4 iPad Pros. And as somebody who's used their iPad Pro as their main computer since 2018, the truth is that all of these iPads at the base layer can 90% do the same exact thing. But in this video, we're going to distinguish why you would go above that level, talk about the certain users and use cases that go above that level, and illustrate this with what I'm calling the iPad pyramid. So let's get right into it and talk all things iPad in 2025. So quick caveat before we jump into this, I will be talking about only new versions of the iPads, so the iPads that are currently being sold by Apple. If you start to compare newer, cheaper iPads to older, more expensive iPads, then it starts to get a little bit wishy-washy, and you can always find an argument for getting an old one over a new one, so we're sticking to just the new iPads right now. So let's get into this and talk about this iPad pyramid. So with the pyramid on the bottom, we're going to be talking about the base layer of the iPad, and I thought this was the best way to visualize and show off what each iPad can do, but more importantly, the features you get from both a hardware and software perspective on each iPad level and each iPad tier. So on the bottom, you have the base layer, like I mentioned, which is going to be the things that they all have in common. All the iPads, whether you spend $350 on the 11-inch iPad or you spend over $2,000 on a fully loaded 13-inch iPad Pro, all these iPads can do what is being shown in that base layer. So they all run some sort of version of iPadOS 18, they all have their own form of Apple Pencil, whether it is the Gen 1, Gen 2, USB-C, Pencil Pro. They all have their own form of Magic Keyboard or Folio keyboard, aside from the iPad mini 7, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And then they have the mainstays, so the design language for the most part is all relatively the same, albeit some of them might be a little bit different in terms of bezels, but if you look at an iPad from afar, a lot of them now look pretty identical. They all have USB-C, they all have some sort of biometric unlock, whether it's Face ID or Touch ID. So again, it's that base layer of both software and hardware features that really makes iPads, especially at that cheaper price point, so amazing to recommend. And then even when it comes down to the iPad app ecosystem, every single application that can be downloaded on that 13-inch M4 iPad Pro, for the most part, I'm sure there's an exception or two, but there are hundreds of thousands of applications that can be downloaded both on the iPad Pro and on the entry-level iPad and still work exactly the same. All the iPads will still have iCloud, will still run your Apple ecosystem, will still sync across all your devices, will still have all the hardcore Apple applications like Freeform, the Notes application, and anything else that you use from a cloud and Apple ecosystem perspective. So if all you need are those common features that are on the base layer and you just want the cheapest form and the kind of an iPad experience, then yes, that 11th generation iPad, that base layer iPad is going to be more than enough to handle all those tasks, and it might surprise you when you do push it at the kind of upper edge and doing a little bit more. So some of the things to consider about this iPad specifically is that it is running the new A16 chip in there, which was recently updated from the A14 chip. But one thing to note is that it does not have Apple Intelligence support, which is hit or miss for most people. A lot of people don't really care about it, but just know that you will not be able to have Apple Intelligence support moving forward, even though this is a brand new iPad. But outside of that, you do have your 10.9-inch LCD display that is touchscreen. You have the ability to have Apple Pencil Gen 1 support, as well as Apple Pencil USB-C support, which is one that I would gravitate towards. It baffles me that we're now 10 years into the Apple Pencil Gen 1 and Apple still sells it for $100. And then from a case perspective, you have their Magic Slim Keyboard or Folio keyboard case, which again, for the price is a little bit expensive when you do compare it to the price of something like the iPad itself. But you do have an option if you want a first-party keyboard accessory that works with those pin connectors directly from Apple. So again, the iPad 11th generation is going to be the best for the entry-level people, for people that just want to throw around iPad, or for people that just want the kind of purest iPad experience kind of right there at that base layer. But now before we continue, let's talk about our sponsor ESR, who is hooking us up and making sure that our new iPads stay fully protected. I've been using ESR products for years now, and what's really impressed me is the overall value that you get. Their stuff feels premium, works great, and still somehow costs way less than first-party options, so when they told me they had a full new lineup for the latest iPads, I was 100% in. So let's start off with the display because it is the most important aspect of the iPad, and one of the biggest things about screen protectors is how difficult it is to actually apply them. So ESR's new Ultra Fit Classic Screen Protector makes that installation absolutely foolproof. It's a two-step process with built-in dust removal strip and frame. You get a flawless bubble-free fit, and it's 2 times stronger than your average tempered glass screen protector. Next, you're going to need some sort of versatile case, and the flip magnetic case is just that. It supports multiple viewing angles, stays stable on basically any surface, and folds into a vertical portrait mode. It's slim, durable, super functional, and just $22.99. Then you have the sleeper product, in my opinion, which is going to be the Geo Digital Pencil. You get all the Apple Pencil-like performance, like palm rejection, tilt sensitivity, and you get extras like Find My support, shortcut buttons, Bluetooth battery display, fast USB-C charging, and then some. And again, all that for just $29.99, so it's much less than Apple's first-party one and gets you about 99% of the way there. And then finally, we have my favorite product, which is going to be the Rebound magnetic keyboard case. It's got a full multi-touch trackpad, smooth scissor switch keys, adjustable backlighting, and a rock-solid magnetic stand. The best part is that it's a third of the price of Apple's Magic Keyboard, which makes it one of the best value picks in the entire iPad accessory space. It's available in black, white, and purple, so there's a look for any aesthetic. So if you're looking for high value and budget conscious iPad accessories, then ESR has got you covered literally and figuratively. Big shout out to ESR for partnering up with 9to5Mac on this iPad buyer's guide. Everything will be linked down below in the order that I mentioned it, but now let's get back to the rest of this buyer guide and see which iPad you should be picking up. So now let's get into that versatility tier, which is right above what I mentioned earlier, which was that base layer option with the 11th generation iPad. And this is where the iPad mini starts to fit in, because this is where you start to get a few more features. Now keep in mind that a lot of the features I'm going to mention here can now also be done by the M3 iPad Air, as well as the M4 iPad Pro, but that is how you start to build into it, because the higher you go up this pyramid, the more niche you get on each of these products. But in this versatility tier, you do have a couple extra things. So for instance, you do have Apple Pencil Pro support on the iPad mini, which means you have the hover feature as well. So those are things that are now coming that aren't available on something like the 11th generation iPad. You now have Apple Intelligence support, so if that's important to you, this is going to be the cheapest entry point for Apple Intelligence, which is going to be that $499 price point. So with that Apple Intelligence, that means you get the A17 Pro chip, which means you get at least 8 GB of RAM, which means that the iPad mini 7 can handle a few more intensive tasks than something like the iPad 11th gen, or at least in theory, you can push it a little bit more because it has a few more GPU cores in it, and of course, the RAM that comes with it. But this one is kind of like a floater, because in my opinion, the iPad mini, the form factor itself, that 8.3-inch display, is kind of something that can be thrown around in a purse, in a bag. It can be used as a supplementary device. It can be used as a bigger iPhone if you wanted to. It can be used as a smaller iPad. So this one, in my opinion, can be for literally anyone. It just depends on where you see the iPad mini fitting in your workflow. Because you can make it a productivity workhorse, but you can also just make it a leisure machine, and you can also just kind of use it as you see fit for both. You can use it to surf the web and do some research on whatever project you're working on. You can use it to get some actual tasks done, like using LumaFusion and Affinity Photo to get some thumbnails done. So it's great for editing in Lightroom as well. So you can do a little bit of everything with this iPad mini. But again, from a hardware perspective, you're still dealing with a lot of the same stuff that's in the 11th gen iPad versus something that's on those upper tier iPads. So for me, the iPad mini is pretty much the iPad for all, because it fits in a lot of different scenarios. So now we're getting to the next tier of the pyramid, which is going to be that mid tier, right? This is where that new M3 iPad Air and the 11 and the 13-inch variants come into play. And again, you heard it in the name. This is going to be the first iPad in this list that has an M series chip, which gives you a lot more efficiency and a lot more versatility from a software standpoint, or at least a software capability standpoint. So the first thing to mention here is that this is targeted more so for professionals, for creatives, for students that need a little bit more power. So if you do want to edit a 4K video, you can. If you want to use Affinity Photo. But again, it can also do everything that I mentioned before. So it's still a leisure iPad, but it can do things just a lot more efficiently, a lot more quickly, and with a lot more confidence than something like the 11th gen iPad. Because in theory, you can download the same application and use them side by side. You can just do more on that M3 chip than you can on something like the A16 chip. But similar to the iPad mini, this also has Apple Intelligence support. This also has the new Apple Pencil Pro support, the hover feature. But some of the new features you get in here are going to be USB 3.0 speeds when you do plug it in directly to the USB-C port. Still not Thunderbolt, but it is a USB 3 controller. You also get something like Stage Manager, which was not available on the iPad mini or the 11th gen iPad, which allows you to have multi-window kind of usability both in the iPad as well as extended monitor support, which is good to see. You also get a brand new Magic Keyboard, which recently released. I'm going to put brand new in quotes there because they essentially just took the current Magic Keyboard for the iPad Pro, changed up the material choice a little bit by making it less premium, took $20 off the price point, and gave us a new Magic Keyboard that is specifically made for the iPad Air. And then you also get a Liquid Retina display, albeit it's still a 60Hz display, and we'll get to the promotion in a little bit, but again, that gets you a little closer to that upper echelon. So if we went from 90% of everything on the bottom base layer, iPad mini probably doing 95%, we're now at like that 97% with the iPad Air that it can do compared to the iPad Pro. So the best selling point for the iPad Air right now is that it gives you a balance of performance as well as price, because you can get into an entry-level iPad Air at $599 with an M3 chip. That's relatively inexpensive in my opinion. And at the very end of the video, I'm going to show off exactly how to get it for a little bit cheaper on Amazon as well as on the Apple Store. And now lastly, we got to talk about the iPad Pro. This is going to be that top tier, that upper level, the end all be all of the iPad lineup, because Again, from a hardware perspective, this is where Apple's really flexing all their muscles, right? Because from a software perspective, there really isn't much that you can't do on the iPad Air that you can do on the iPad Pro. This is going to come down to the latest and greatest when it comes to hardware, because that is where the iPad Pro truly does shine. Of course, on the front of it, you have the best-in-class display, which is going to be that 120Hz ProMotion tandem OLED display, which wowed everybody, and in my opinion, is still the best display on any product ever, right? Like literally ever. I would pay $1,000 just for the iPad Pro to be a dummy display for a portable on-the-go monitor, because that's how good the display is on that iPad Pro. And then you also get some other bits and bobs. Of course, you get the latest M4 chip. You have the ability to go up to 16 gigs of RAM if you go with the 1TB version. You have the ability to get a nano texture display directly from Apple. Again, you do have to go through a couple of things in terms of getting the 1TB version and willing to spend that much more, but it is an option at that upper echelon in that upper tier. You also get a full Thunderbolt port on there as opposed to just a USB-C port, which gives you much faster data transfer speeds, and it gives you the ability to use a lot more peripherals a lot more quickly and a lot more efficiently. Of course, from face value, if you look at both of these iPads side by side, and for the normal person, they're going to look relatively the same, if not exactly the same. But with the new iPad or the M4 iPad Pro, you do get Apple's latest and greatest when it comes to design language and the ability to make things as thin as possible with a 5.1mm thick iPad Pro. And then you also get a better camera system, you get the LiDAR scanner, you get a flash. So just everything that Apple could give you, they threw at this iPad and made it as good as they could from a hardware perspective, because they knew that from a software perspective, they couldn't really do much. So to give you guys an idea of what the parity looks like, or the comparison between the iPad Air and the iPad Pro, in my opinion, iPadOS 18 runs identical on both of these iPads. There's no difference. The apps are the same. The ability to get stuff done is the same. It might export a little bit faster of a LumaFusion file or a 3D render on the M4 iPad Pro with 16 gigs of RAM, but at the end of the day, the M3 iPad Air is no slouch either. So in my opinion, the iPad Air is for those people that want and need some power, but at the best price possible. And the iPad Pro is for those that just need the absolute bleeding edge in performance, where their kind of exponential curve is already plateauing a little bit. Whereas you can spend an additional $500, because that's a difference between a 13-inch iPad Air and a 13-inch M4 iPad Pro, but you're not going to get that much value out of those $500. You still will get more value overall, but the amount of different things that you can do functionally on the iPad Pro that you can do on the iPad Air for $500 might not be enough. You have to really know what you're doing and really want to have something like that tandem OLED display or Thunderbolt to really justify that $500 difference, which is something that I have done. And then with the accessories, you also have Apple Pencil Pro support, as well as the USB-C Apple Pencil support, and you do get the latest and greatest in terms of the Magic Keyboard, which is a little bit different from a hardware perspective. It does have that aluminum finish and gives you a little bit of a bigger trackpad, and again, that's going to be a $20 upgrade over the iPad Air Magic Keyboard. So I do quickly want to talk about pricing for each of these models, because I always recommend people go to Amazon. Amazon always has the best deals some way, somehow, especially the more you want to spend, the more you're going to save overall. For instance, I know that right now the 11th gen iPad Pro, the brand new one, I believe is like $80 to $100 off. Same thing goes with the iPad mini. I've seen it for $399 brand new. I've seen the iPad Air, the M3 version, for $499 brand new. So you can get some great pricing on these iPads, and even the iPad Pro. So you can get something like the 13-inch, which is normally $1,300. You can get it for $1,100 or even $1,000, depending on what time of year you're looking at these things from Amazon perspective. So at the end of the day, which iPad should you get? So in my opinion, if you're looking at the pyramid that I'm showing off, and you can see that in the base layer it covers all of your needs, then don't waste your money on something more expensive. Just get the 11th gen iPad, get whatever accessories you need with it, and then be able to use that, because that's going to be enough for those 90% of the use cases. And then as you climb up the ladder, if for instance you absolutely want Apple Intelligence but you want the small form factor, then go with the iPad mini. If you really need Apple Intelligence and then want also Apple Pencil Pro support, and want a little bit faster USB-C, but you don't really care about display, then maybe get the 13-inch iPad Air and save yourself some money compared to the iPad Pro. But you know who you are. If you want the latest and greatest, if you want the best screen tech, the fastest Thunderbolt cable or Thunderbolt port, then you go with the iPad Pro. So that's what I mean when I say it's easy to distinguish which iPad is for which person and which use case, because they all can do the same thing. It's just a matter of how fast you get from point A to point B on each of these iPads from a software perspective, and what you need from a hardware perspective on the iPads. But that will just about do for this video, everybody. Hopefully you learned a little bit and understood what the iPad lineup is currently looking like, because, again, most of these iPads can all do the same thing. It's just a matter of what you want to do on the iPad in that top 10%. If you only need the 90%, save as much money as you can. But if you start to kind of creep into that 95, 97, 100% of tasks needed, then yeah, jump into the iPad Pro, the iPad Air, or even an iPad Mini if you just want a versatile iPad. But let me know in the comment down below what you think. Have you picked up any of these new iPads in their 2025 iPad lineup? Always curious to know what your use cases are and how far you've been able to push some of those cheaper iPads or even the most expensive iPad thereafter. And I'm curious to know some unique use cases for iPads. Like I know people use it in pilot settings. I know people use it in the medical field. I know people use it for architecture, in CAD, and Blender, and coding, and there's a bunch of different ways to use your iPad. And then you have me, who's editing videos in LumaFusion, editing thumbnails, going on Safari, using Slack, and just doing day-to-day things on your iPad. But that'll do it, everybody. If you made it to the end, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below so I know you made it to the end. Big shout out to ESR for partnering up with 9to5Mac. They make some great, high-quality and budget-friendly accessories for your brand new iPads. But if you want to watch more videos like this one, definitely check out one of these videos right here. And until next time, I'm Fernando. Peace, everybody. I will forever be an iPad Pro guy, even though I probably don't even need all the power that this thing has. I just love it.